Alright guys, welcome back to Underground Science, and in this video we're going to finish up talking about the pathophysiology of COVID-19. Right, this is our part 3 video, so make sure and go and check out my part 1, part 2 video of the pathophysiology of COVID-19. Alright, so let's go and get started. So if you remember in our part 2 video we said that the viruses have bud off of the type 2 pneumocyte, which are orange ones, so let me go and label that. So these ones are our type 2 pneumocytes. Alright, our type 2 pneumocytes. And so we said that the viruses have successfully been made or hacked our cells' machinery, and we went over how and have exited our type 2 pneumocyte. It is now in the space, or the lumen, you could say, of the alveoli, of the alveolus. So this is one big alveolus. Alright, so this is one big alveolus in the lungs. Alright, so what's going to happen now? Well, first things first is that when the type 2, or when the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so let me just go and say this, right? This is our SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes the COVID-19 disease. So when the SARS-CoV-2 virus buds off, it's actually going to destroy this type 2 pneumocyte. All right, and when it destroys this type 2 pneumocyte, right, we're going to see that there's going to be inflammatory cytokines released by this type 2 pneumocyte as it's being destroyed. All right, so we're going to see many inflammatory molecules released, inflammatory cytokines, and these inflammatory cytokines are then going to trigger the alveolar macrophages. So let's go and draw the alveolar macrophages now. So we have alveolar macrophages just chilling in the alveoli, ready to help, right? So we have alveolar macrophages right here. Let me go and finish drawing it in. So like so. And once these alveolar macrophages get triggered via these inflammatory cytokines released by the destroyed type 2 pneumocyte, right, it's going to go and trigger the crap out of this alveolar macrophage, being like, yo, there's a virus here, we need help. All right, so this alveolar macrophage is like, all right, I got you, let's go and help, let's go and destroy these viruses. What we're going to do is that I'm going to release some of my cytokines, right, so some of my inflammatory cytokines, so we can attract more white blood cells to this area, and then we can start to fight off this virus that we're infected with. So what the alveolar macrophage is going to do is that it's going to release some inflammatory cytokines. Now, some of the main ones is that it's going to release tumor necrotic factor alpha. It's going to release interleukin 1. It's going to release interleukin 6, and it's going to release interleukin 8. All right, so those are one of the main cytokines. Some of the main cytokines, inflammatory cytokines that the alveolar macrophage will release once it's triggered by the inflammatory cytokines because of the destruction of the type 2 pneumocyte as the SARS-CoV-2 virus is bud off from the type 2 pneumocyte. And these inflammatory cytokines are then going to travel to the blood vessels to the capillaries and venules near the alveolus. All right, in this case, there's only one alveolus. So let me go and show that. All right, so let's go and erase this real quick. All right, so remember that the orange ones or the yellow, the orange ones are the type 2 pneumocytes. All right, so let me go and fill this in. So what's going to happen is that these cytokines are going to be like, all right, you know what? I'm going to help you guys out. What I'm going to do is we're going to go right to here. We're going to diffuse through this alveolar membrane because we're inflammatory cytokines, and we're going to try to attract more white blood cells, all right, because we need to help you guys out. So the inflammatory cytokines come here, they go into the blood vessel. So remember from our cardiovascular system playlist, we have our deoxygenated capillaries coming down, right, arterioles to capillaries, and then, so let me go and draw this, and then we have our oxygenated venules going to the heart, all right, into the left atrium. So the inflammatory cytokines will come here and enter the bloodstream, all right? And once it enters the bloodstream, they're going to cause more inflammation inside the bloodstream and are mainly going to affect the endothelial cells. All right, so what's going to happen is that these inflammatory cytokines are going to then trigger, so let me go and draw this, it's going to trigger the relaxation, so some things these cytokines are going to do, let's just make a list, they're going to trigger the relaxation the relaxation of the smooth muscles, right, of our blood vessels, so be these near our alveolus. Now, what's that going to do? If our smooth muscles of our blood vessels relax, that means we're going to vasodilate our blood vessels. So what's going to happen? Because of this, we're going to undergo vasodilation of our blood vessels near the alveolus. All right, so that's one thing that the inflammatory cytokines will do. What's another thing that's going to do? Let's write it over here. Another thing we said that the inflammatory cytokines are going to attract more white blood cells. Now, what white blood cells? We're going to attract more monocytes. All right, so let's go and draw some monocytes coming to the rescue. All right, so some monocytes here. And we're going to have some neutrophils coming in. All right, so neutrophils coming in here. So let's go and draw that real quick. All right, so we have our neutrophils here. And so we're attracting more white blood cells, right? So let's go and do that. So in brown, again, we're mentioning what these inflammatory cytokines here are triggering, all right? So then they're going to trigger for more white blood cells, like neutrophils and monocytes, to arrive, right? So it's going to attract more white blood cells to arrive to the area of havoc, all right? Arrive to the area of havoc. All right. So that's the main things that we see right now that's happening. We're going to see vasodilation and more white blood cells coming in because of these inflammatory cytokines released by the alveolar macrophages. Now these neutrophils are going to come inside the alveolar sac. So they're going to come inside, and once they come inside, we're going to see that these neutrophils especially start releasing certain toxic chemicals. All right, so let's just go and show this. It's coming inside. So we're going to draw these right here. All right, so it's going to arrive inside. I'm going to have some monocytes arrive inside, act as macrophages to help out. So let's focus on neutrophils, that the neutrophils are going to start to, let's draw one big one here. And we see that the neutrophils actually start to release things like a peroxide molecule, a superoxide molecule, right? And we see it starts to release some hydrogen peroxide molecules. We see it starts to release some, hydroxyl group molecules. So if you notice, everything that I'm mentioning is part of reactive oxygen species. So we can say that the neutrophils start to release reactive oxygen species, all right? Start to release reactive oxygen species. And what's this going to do? Well, the whole goal, the neutrophils are like, yo, take these and destroy the crap out of this virus, all right? Because we don't want this here. We're trying to chill out, so stop. You're not invited to the party. So these reactive oxygen species just try to destroy these viruses, right? And then also what these neutrophils release, right? These white blood cells is proteases or proteinases, all right? So let's go and write that down. So they also secrete proteinases. All right, let's go and say proteases. So proteases are going to try to break down the proteins that that the SARS-CoV-2 virus are comprised of, right? So these proteases are going to come along here and try to break the crap out of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and fight back, along with all of these reactive oxygen species, right? So all of this, the goal of everything right here, all this inflammation, all this releases reactive oxygen species and proteases to fight the virus. But what starts to happen also is that our type 1 and type 2 pneumocytes are also made of certain proteins that these proteases also attack. So not only are our type 1 pneumocytes being attacked, these proteases also come along here and start to attack more of these type 2 pneumocytes, right? If the virus isn't already screwing it up, or these proteinases start to break down our type 1 pneumocytes. All right, so as you can see, if our immune system can't take care of it fast, we start to wreak havoc, all right? And so our type 1 pneumocytes start to get broken down by these proteases that our own white blood cells release. But they don't know that. They're just trying to help out because they know a virus is there, right? But what they don't know is that we're destroying our alveolar cells also, right? If our immune system doesn't take care of it immediately. So we start to see this, and what happens now? If we start to destroy our type 1 and 2 pneumocytes, well, first of all, in our previous videos, we discussed that the type 2 pneumocytes, right, that the type 2 pneumocytes are responsible for surfactant production. All right, so we said that they're responsible for surfactant production, which is just a serous fluid that lines our alveolar sac, right, the inner part, and it helps reduce surface tension. But what happens if we're destroying these cells, right, either by a virus budding off or our protease is destroying it? Well, our surfactant production decreases. What does that mean? We increase surface tension. So we're decreasing surfactant production, or cuboidal surfactant, and that means it's leading to an increase in surface tension, all right, of our alveolus as a whole. So I don't know why I spelled it like that, all right? So it's increasing our surface tension, right? So what does that mean? We have an increased chance of alveolar collapse. We have an increased chance now, increased chance of alveolar collapse. All right, so that's one thing that's happening. And remember, our proteases are also destroying the type 1 pneumocytes. And we said that the type 1 pneumocytes are responsible for one of the main things, gas exchange. So if we're destroying our type 1 pneumocytes, what we're going to see is that we have a decreased ability of gas exchange. All right, so we're decreasing the ability of our gas exchange. So CO2 and oxygen are going to have more trouble trying to cross our alveolar membrane. All right. So that's that. So what we've seen so far is that our type 1 pneumocytes are getting destroyed, our type 2 pneumocytes are getting destroyed, we're getting a bunch of inflammation. Okay, so let's not forget about the vasodilation. Now why is this bad? All right, well, the vasodilation, what happens is that we increase the permeability of our capillary, of our specific endothelial cells lining our capillaries and our venules. All right, so what does that mean? If we increase permeability, that means more fluid is going to leak out of our blood vessels near leak out of our pulmonary blood vessels, all right, near our alveoli. So what does that mean? So let's go and clear some of this space out, all right? So let's go and duplicate this page and clear some of this space out so we could talk about that. All right, so let's go and, sorry about that. You know what, let me just to save time, I'm not going to erase all this. I'm just going to draw a new picture, all right? So one moment. All right, here you go. So this is much better, all right? So remember, I didn't draw, I'm not going to write it all again, but remember that we still have all that inflammation happening, right? Remember our tumor necrotic factor alpha released by our alveolar macrophages, our interleukin 1, 6, and 8. All of that causes what? Vasodilation. So let's go and write that down because we'll talk about that in this slide. So vasodilation. So what this is going to happen again is it's going to increase the permeability of our endothelial cells, right? Of our capillaries as a whole near our alveoli. So what that's going to do is that it's going to increase the amount of fluid that leaks out near our alveoli. So how is this going to work, right? So what's going to happen is we're going to have regular amount of plasma, right, traveling down into our blood, right? It's going to be, remember in our hematocrit, a regular hematocrit has 55% plasma, and then 90% of that plasma is water, right? So we're going to have fluid leak out now because vasodilation increases, which means permeability increases. So let me go and write this down. This means that permeability, right, near our blood vessels of our lungs, or our alveoli, permeability will increase. So what that's going to do again is going to cause extra fluid to start leaking out. All right, so what's going to happen is we're going to have fluid start to leak out, and you guys can already guess that now we're going to have fluid here, right? We're going to have fluid here, and remember, our type 2 pneumocytes, are getting damaged, and that's what? Secreting surfactant, cuboidal surfactant, which is doing what? Right? Initially, cuboidal surfactant decreases surface tension, right? But now, since these type 2 pneumocytes are getting destroyed, right, based on the proteases and the inflammation that's going on, and the viruses that are budding off from these type 2 pneumocytes, because of the destruction of these type 2 pneumocytes, we're decreasing the amount of surfactant production, which means we're increasing surface tension, which is going to even increase the chances even more of alveolar collapse. On top of that, guys, we're putting more pressure on the alveoli on the outside by leaking fluid, right? Or we're having fluid leak out of our blood vessels. And soon what that's going to lead to is fluids start to leak through our alveoli because of all the inflammation. So not only are we leaking fluid on the outside, it's going to start building up inside our alveoli. So we're going to have fluid start to build up. And what is this called? Well, we're going to have pneumonia, right? So when we have fluid in our alveoli, this is going to lead to pneumonia. So let's go and write that down. This is going to lead to pneumonia. And this is when the breathing starts to get really difficult because now you don't have much space for oxygen, right? Because of all this consolidation that's going on already. In the previous slide that we talked about, now liquid and fluids are forming or are coming in through our alveolar membrane into our alveolar sac, right? So oxygen diffusion is going to be really hard to get that much oxygen down. Plus, our type 1 pneumocytes are getting destroyed too, remember, because of the proteases. So it's like a double whammy, right? Our type 1 pneumocytes are getting destroyed. That helps us in gas exchange. When the fluid is leaking into alveoli, giving us some pneumonia, right? So it's getting so hard to breathe in, first of all, because we don't have much space anymore to store the oxygen, or not to store, but to fill up the oxygen in this alveolar space. On top of that, we can't diffuse the oxygen down into, or we can't have diffusion of oxygen that well down into our blood capillaries, right? Because of all this increase in thickness, right? We have so much thickness now. We have so much thickness in between our alveolar space and our blood capillaries because of all that fluid that's leaking in. So this is going to have trouble, right? This will have a lot of trouble diffusing down. So remember, if we don't have enough oxygen going down into our, or just in general from our lungs to our blood, what is that going to lead to? That's going to lead to less oxygen in our blood, less partial pressure of oxygen overall. And less partial pressure of oxygen overall into our blood is going to be called hypoxemia. All right, so we're going to have hypoxemia. All right, and also if we have less oxygen in our blood, right? Remember we have special types of chemoreceptors in our heart, right, near our aorta, and in other important places like our carotid bodies, right? And those chemoreceptors will sense this low partial pressure of oxygen, and it's going to cause our heart rate to increase, our contractility to increase, so we can pump more blood, right, throughout the body because we're not getting that much oxygen anymore. So we need more blood in order to somehow compensate. So we're going to have increase in cardiac output. All right, increase in cardiac output. All right, we'll go over the cardiac output equation in a future video. All right, but pretty much cardiac output, what it means is that it's the amount of blood pumped by the heart throughout the body in 1 minute. So because we're increasing our heart rate, we're pumping more blood in a given amount of in a minute, right? So we're increasing cardiac output because we're trying to compensate for that low partial pressure of oxygen. But guess what else, guys? Right? If we have trouble diffusing oxygen down into our blood capillaries, we're also going to have trouble diffusing CO2 from our blood capillaries back to our alveolar sacs, right? Or into our open space of our alveolar sacs, right? So actually, I should draw the CO2 here because this is where it's deoxygenated, right? This is where it's traveling from, but it's fine, right? Just to get the idea. And so we're going to have trouble doing this also. Okay, so we're going to have trouble doing this and trouble diffusing oxygen back down. So what is it called if we have extra amount of partial pressure of CO2 in our blood, right? This could potentially lead to hypercapnia. All right, so hypercapnia is too much carbon dioxide in the blood. So hypercapnia. All right, so so as you can see, this the COVID-19, getting the SARS-CoV-2 right in our lungs, and seeing how this works scientifically really tells us that this is dangerous. All right, so it leads to many bad things like pneumonia, right? Extra CO2 in the blood because it can't diffuse into the alveolar sac that well. We're going to have trouble breathing, so we're going to have to try harder and breathe. So we're going to have to work harder to breathe, right? So it's going to write that down. We'll have to work harder in order to breathe. All right, so we'll have to work harder to breathe. All right, so as you can see, this is really bad, right? Oops, sorry about that. It's super bad, and it just causes a lot of havoc, right? So that's pretty much the basic idea, right, of how the SARS-CoV-2 virus affects our lungs, our respiratory pathway, And remember, we have nerves here, right, or dendrites that pick up the signals, right? So when we get a lot of inflammation, we actually trigger these dendrites and we fire action potentials down to our brain stem. Then we trigger the cough reflex so we can try to cough some of it out, but it turns out that we actually produce some dry cough that we mentioned in the previous slide, all right? Because we have so much consolidation inside our alveolar sac that everything's getting harder, right? Our cells are getting destroyed. We're trying to breathe harder, right? Inflammation's increasing. Our immune system response is increasing, and this is all going to take time because soon we'll have to somehow bring these alveolar macrophages that hopefully can break down these viruses and can bring them to the lymph nodes, right? Especially in the lymph nodes nearby, so that our T cells and B cells can work together to make more antibodies and bring more antibodies to this area so we can fight off this virus. All right, so, and one thing I want to say before we end this video is that they also found that through more research that in the heart, there's, the myocytes of the heart, right? So the heart muscle cells, the myocytes, right? So we're going to have the myocytes of the heart. So make sure to go check out my cardiovascular system if you're not familiar with the heart. But the myocytes of the heart actually have ACE2 receptors on it, is what they found, all right? So we have ACE2 receptors on the myocytes of the heart and remember in our part one video, our part one video, the pathophysiology of the COVID-19 video, we said that the SARS-CoV-2 virus, right? So let's go and draw that. The SARS-CoV-2 virus actually enters through our S spikes, right? It binds its S spikes onto the ACE2 enzyme of the type 2 pneumocytes of the lungs, or the alveoli, right? And so let's go and label this. This is the ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme type 2 receptor, and that's how the virus enters into the type 2 pneumocytes. Well, it turns out that the heart myocytes also have these ACE2 receptors. This is why that they found out recently that it affects the heart also. So you can see heart problems, heart attacks, and also we see that SARS-CoV-2 virus, right, increases the chances of stroke also because it increases the chances of our blood to coagulate. All right, so it increases just the chances of stroke because of the increased chances of coagulation of our blood. All right, so things like these tell us, based on science, that this COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2, right, this pandemic, it's serious and it can be really dangerous if we don't take precaution, all right, like wearing a mask and all that. So so this is the basic things I wanted to get through in this video. And also, if you do more research on this, you'll see that it also affects other organs in the body, right? Like the kidneys also, right? Because the kidneys also have ACE2 receptors, which mean the virus can affect the kidney cells also, right? So you can see your kidneys getting worse also through this virus. And so things like this, and if you want to go ahead and do more research on it, it's pretty fascinating once you start learning more about the science. And yeah, so hopefully this video made sense to you guys. Hopefully you guys got a better idea, right, by watching all the 3 parts of the pathophysiology of COVID-19 videos that I made. So I hope to see you guys in my future videos. We'll talk about more cool topics about biochem, physics, and chem. And don't forget to hit that notification bell and like and subscribe. All right, guys, see you later, and stay safe.